Secrecy. How odd this word sounded. What a strange appeal, what a mysterious fascination it exerted upon my being. Until then, I had always believed it did not matter at all how a certain teaching was received, or what book had been read or studied in order to learn it. I thought that the only important thing was to practice it correctly, accompanied by the desire to go deeper and deeper into it. The idea began to enter my mind that it was in fact okay to protect precious lore from indiscreet eyes. In that occasion, I had nothing to say against the vow of secrecy. Later, over a span of many years, I changed my opinion because I witnessed an innumerable series of absurdities originating from this behest. Dramatically, I had the evidence that it brought miserable repercussions into the lives of thousands of people. Staring into my eyes, with an enormous emotional impact, he went on to say that a practice learned from any other source was worth nothing. It will not be effective in matters of spiritual purpose. And a possible effect, only apparently encouraging, might be a dangerous illusion in which the ego remains trapped for a long time. Inflamed by an absolute faith, he launched himself into a wide discourse on the value of the guru, spiritual teacher, a puzzling concept to me because it was attributed to a person that he had not known directly. Having been initiated into Kriya through the legitimated channels of PY's organization, PY was, to him, real and present in his life, and his guru. The same thing was true for the other people belonging to that group. Their guru was a special aid sent by God himself. Therefore, such an event was the greatest luck a human being can ever have. The logical consequence, underlined with overflowing emphasis, was that abandoning such form of aid or looking for a different spiritual path amounted to a hateful rejection of the divine hand, stretched out in benediction. He asked me to demonstrate for him my book-learned Kriya technique. He expected, I suppose, to verify a well-rooted prejudice that the technique, received through illegitimate channels, could not, because of a particular spiritual law, be anything but corrupted. He smiled when he saw me breathing through the nose. Then he asked me to explain if there was something upon which I was focusing my attention during my breathing. According to the books I had read, the energy could be visualized both flowing inside the spine and around the spine. Since PY wrote that a Kriyaban mentally directs his life energy to revolve, upward and downward, around the 6 spinal centers, I chose the second of the 2 possibilities, and this was the version I explained. Having also read in another book that during Kriya Pranayam the practitioner was supposed to chant Om mentally into each chakra, I added this detail as well. I did not realize that PY had decided to simplify the instructions taught in the West, using the other variation with no mental chanting of Om. While telling him these details, I saw an inner satisfaction spreading over his face. Clearly, he didn't identify my practice with the technique of Kriya Pranayam he had learned. The secret, he was bound to, had not been broken by the author of my esoteric book. Pretending to feel sorry for my consequent disappointment, he informed me in an official tone that my technique had nothing to do with Kriya Pranayam. A really bizarre situation was taking place. I was describing for him a technique very similar to Kriya Pranayam taught by Lahiri Mahashaya, while this gentleman was 100% sure that I was talking nonsense. However, since my position was totally incompatible with his basic tenets, he recommended that I send a written account to the headquarters of PY's organization, describing the details of my vicissitudes, hoping that they would accept me as a disciple and, in due time, grant me the sacred initiation to Kriya Yoga. I was somewhat stunned by the tone in which our dialogue was progressing. In order to re-establish the initial agreeability of our meeting, I tried to reassure him about the positive effects I had gained from my practice. My statement actually had the effect of worsening the whole matter, giving him the chance to scold me a second time, which was not totally unfair but undoubtedly out of place. He made it clear I should never look for any tangible effects in the practice of Kriya, much less should I display them, because in this way I would lose them. That clever guy had talked himself straight into an obvious contradiction without even realizing it. He was saying that the results were too important to risk losing them by telling others, while a few seconds before he had stressed that they were of no value whatsoever. Realizing he had given too much of his time to me, a strange metamorphosis took place in his demeanor. It was as if all of a sudden he had been invested with a sacred role. He promised he would pray for me. On that day, I had lost the fight. I told him I would follow his advice. As a matter of fact, from that moment I abandoned pranayam entirely and restricted my practice to simply centering my attention between the eyebrows, Kutastha, just as he had suggested. Group meditation. The group practicing Kriya met twice a week to practice the techniques together. The room devoted to meditation was bare but pleasant. Each member paid part of the rental, so that continuance would not depend on the owner's whims and could be dedicated to an exclusively spiritual use. I began attending these meetings and I remember it nostalgically, listening to Indian songs translated and harmonized for Westerners and, above all, meditating together was a true joy. Everything seemed heavenly to me, even though little time was given to the practice of meditation, no more than 20 minutes, often barely 15 minutes. A particularly inspiring session of collective practice took place on Christmas Eve, enriched by devotional songs and lasting many hours. At the end of each meditation we were required to depart in silence. Thus I began to know my new friends more closely only during the monthly, social lunch. It was a beautiful chance to spend some hours talking and enjoying each other's company. Since many of us did not have their families' approval, much less support, in the practice of yoga, the only occasion we had to spend time among people with the same ideas and interests was an experience of serenity and relaxation. Unfortunately, the pleasantry of our meetings was partly spoiled because the directors of PY's organization had requested us not to talk about other spiritual paths or deal with specific details of Kriya Yoga techniques. Only authorized people could cover such a role, no one in our group could. During our gatherings, since our conversations were strictly kept on well-defined tracks, we were not able to find a topic which would be interesting and at the same time respected the given rules. It was not the right place for gossip, unsuitable for a spiritual group discussion. So only one topic was left, the beauty of our spiritual path and our great fortune in having discovered it. No wonder that, after some meetings of mutual exaltation, an almost frightening boredom started to reign. As a last resort, some risked telling some jokes. They were not mean or insulting jokes, but a light and innocent use of humor. Unfortunately, this also had to live up to the devotional attitude kept by many of the members and eventually succumbed to their cold attitude. When you tried to be agreeable, you got a look and a hint of a smile that left you frozen for the rest of the day. They seemed to be unable to show a single inch of true joviality. Thinking over, perhaps they were naturally inclined toward depression. Actually, their enthusiasm towards Kriya was very moderate, and they gave the impression they were practicing the few techniques they knew as if they were accomplishing a sacrifice to atone for their sin of existing. What struck me in an extremely unfavorable way in the behavior of some of them was the belief they were protected by their guru and therefore don't mind putting themselves in dangerous situations, abdicating every prudence before the prospect of doing a very dangerous action in which there are fears for their safety. Their mind was filled with a sort of hysterical joyous anticipation. I don't know if there could exist a worse way to belittle the spiritual teachings. In my opinion, this attitude should be avoided like the plague, being actually a stupid superstition. As a matter of course, the group underwent a great recycling process. Many members who had joined with enthusiasm quit after a few months and then, oddly and without deep reasons, scraped the whole experience off their memory. My open temperament allowed me to become close to one person and establish a bond which later became true friendship. It was not so easy to find what could be called a free spiritual seeker. Many made a display of emotionally charged devotion, others, perhaps envisaging the prospect of expanding our group, seemed to have the sole aim of raising enough funds to provide our rented room with impressive signs of its sacred consecration. Others seemed only social misfits. With a barely concealed impatience, I tried on different occasions to receive some elucidation on the technique of Kriya by discussing what had been my book-learned practice of it. I hoped that someone, making some oblique remark about it, would help me discover the exact Kriya Pranayam technique. No courting could extract even a crumb of information from them. Each one repeated that he was not authorized to give out any explanations, and this rule was strictly respected,